I'm going to talk a little bit about what is storytelling. Before we get started with our stories, we need to know what exactly we're talking about. So I did a little bit of researching and came across the National Storytelling Network. There's an entire network dedicated to preserving the art form of storytelling, keeping it alive, as well as explaining what it is to individuals who aren't sure what storytelling is. And it was really a valuable resource for me to have access to. Just to learn, I'd always been exposed to storytelling with my family. My great-grandfather and my great-aunt would sit and tell stories all the time, and you would hear amazing tales about their lives in Appalachia or their run-ins with this person or that person. And it kind of became an art form around holidays and family gatherings where you'd sit and say, oh, tell that story about this or that. And so it exposed me to stories, sometimes that were rich with family history, and sometimes stories that were regional stories, or not really about a specific person in our family, but a tale that was well known and well loved. So storytelling is actually an ancient art form of expression. We can go back all the way to ancient cultures, and that is something they had in common with storytelling. Even through hieroglyphs, that's an ancient form of trying to relay something that's happened to future generations or other individuals. It's also a valuable form of human expression. We've all been sitting around sometime and at dinner with people you love or people even you've just met and come across them and sit around telling stories. There have probably been many times that you've found yourself at dinner for an hour or two longer than you planned on being. Why? Because you're enjoying each other's company and you're enjoying the tales that you have to share. There are many definitions of storytelling through different cultures and different countries and even different regions. You could look in northern Appalachia down to southern Appalachia and you'd probably come across a bunch of different definitions of what a story means to you, may be different than what a story means to you. But the National Storytelling Network has adopted key definitions of what a story is so that we can really hone in on that definition and recognize what these mean. So a story first is a way to transfer information. That's a key idea or principle behind storytelling. That's really distills down what a story is. We're just transferring information from me to you. And it has oftentimes, give me an example of a fable. Are you all familiar with fables and morals? Does anybody remember one from your childhood or one you've told your child? I'm thinking of Aesop's Fables, or Aesop, it depends on where you're from. Yes?
I was thinking of the one of, gosh, I can't even think of the name of it, the crow and the rock, the crow and they wanted something out of the bottom of a bottle. And
yes.
Wanted a drink of water, that's what it was.
The crow wanting a drink of water, and it dealt with the pebbles in the bottom of the barrel. I really remember one about a fox wanting a piece of meat. Or grapes. It may have been grapes. It maybe depends on your what your parents told you about being greedy. But a fox wanting something and walking across stones and seeing its own reflection in the water and being so greedy that it wanted more than what it had and tried to take what that other fox had in the water and wound up losing everything. So these are fables that often were used to pass wisdom from usually adults to children, but also from individual to individual. This is one form of storytelling. We had the Anansi tales, those are from Africa, and they're really common also to teach children wisdom. And what's an example of a type of tale like that to tell morals or fables that is an Appalachian culture? Jack tales, exactly. Jack tales, where it's all of these tales that some of them are old story tales like Jack and the Beanstalk, but they have an Appalachian twist to them. At the high school that I work at, we've done a lot of Jack tales with the students, and it's always got a resounding moral. That's one type of story. And it's also a way to remember our individuals and remember each other, maybe to remember your ancestors, or I've heard lots of stories about grandparents that I did not get to meet, but I feel like I know them through the stories that I've heard within my family. So that really matters to me, and I find myself telling those stories too. Even though I never met them, I feel like I know them because of these tales. So the key 5 elements of storytelling is, step 1, it is an interactive art. So it has to be interactive. It involves the audience, and the storyteller. It's a two-way street. And how the audience reacts to a story may determine the path that the story takes. A lot of times, a storyteller will never tell the same story the same way twice. If it's a group of children, you may have a little more energy, or they'll rope them in, or they're likely to interrupt you in places that adults never will. So you have to be quick on your feet and think of something to come up with. And sometimes the key, you all know, talking to children, if they're kind of getting unruly and you take your voice down real quiet, suddenly they're tied in again, they're engaged. And those are tricks that a storyteller can use where the story changes shape based on the audience and the listener. Also, the difference between storytelling and theater, because a lot of people think they're similar, is that there's no barrier or imaginary fourth wall. In theater, the audience doesn't really interact with individuals on stage for the most part. The audience reaction certainly can affect the actor's mood and the energy they put out or the way they play a scene, but for the most part, the audience is an invisible character in the event. The actors are interacting with each other, not the audience, whereas storytelling is completely dependent on the audience and interacting directly with them. So different cultures actually have different expectations of what an exact role of a story is. There are some cultures where the stories are so traditional and have such a system that the storyteller speaks at this exact time and then the audience speaks at this next time. And so it's a very definite interaction. And then other cultures, it's a little more loose and a little more free. Number two is that storytelling uses words specifically to share information. So it can be spoken words like we're doing now, or it could be manual such as American Sign Language, but it uses words. And that's different from dance or mime, which is a silent way to tell. It's also telling a tale, but it's not specifically storytelling. Number three is there are actions involved. So that's what the difference is between storytelling and reading a story. If this is a text-based experience where you're reading something, you're interacting with the words on the page, but there's not an individual sharing actions. So a lot of times a storyteller, even if it's just their voice expressing the actions, there's a lot of times a little bit more interaction and there's actions involved rather than writing or text-based or even computer-based interactions for a tale. Number four, it clearly presents a story. That's almost redundant using the word story to describe a story, but it's true. That's very basic and it's very clear. That's what it is. It clearly presents a tale and a story. It's a narrative. There are other art forms that share a story, but they don't have all these other four components that really define storytelling. Theater does share a story. Magazines share a story. Writing shares a story. But they lack these other specific components that make it specifically storytelling. It also specifically has active imagination of the listeners. If I'm doing a dramatic presentation or in sharing with you theater, the listeners aren't imagining what I'm describing to you because you're watching it. The same is with movies. We sit back and we are directly entertained. They lay out for us everything that's happening. But in storytelling, it's just that individual's words. And we're sitting here, I've heard different Jack tales about, say, Jack and the Beanstalk, for example. While you're up here telling your story, I may be sitting down here and imagining in my mind what the kingdom in the sky looks like. And it may be completely different than what you see as the kingdom in the sky. That's the difference between this and theater or movies because they show us the kingdom in the sky, so we don't have the opportunity to imagine that. So using those 5 specific key things, that creates storytelling. And storytelling can occur at the kitchen table and involve all of these elements. It can occur in a large theater in front of thousands of individuals. Storytelling is a part of religious ceremonies and sometimes involves very specific recitation of the text, exactly how it is each time. There's forms of Japanese storytelling that's very key in the exact wording each and every time. And then other storytelling is completely up to the individual. And like I said, you'll never hear it the same way twice. I have a lot of people I've met who never tell the story the same way twice, but I love hearing it every time because it's always entertaining and different. So that gives us the basics of storytelling, what storytelling is. So now we're going to get to experience an example story from Gwenda.